We are heading into the second half. There's still some big names getting called up and a decent number of medium names as well. We'll be going over all our favorite pickups today on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Pick6. Erik, Halterman, and Ryan Boyer here with our Saturday FAAB show. We've got a decent collection of names, I'd say, this week. Some good call-ups, some returning or second call-ups, and also some names we're less excited about, but you got to go find somebody. How are your teams setting up at the halfway point here, Ryan? Are you going to have a lot of work to do these next couple of weeks, or are we cruising? I think you might be muted. We lost the start of your answer there because you were muted, so we're going to assume that was the part where you were telling us about all your teams that are really struggling, and now you're telling us about all your triumphs.
Yeah, I was saying they're hit or miss. I guess is probably most people are doing. They're doing well in a few leagues, doing not so well in some other leagues, and kind of in the middle in some other leagues. So basically running the whole gamut there.
Yeah, still very much enough time, I'd say, all but the teams that are doing terribly. I think any team still in the middle third probably still has a chance if you make the right pickups. I mean, you're going to have to nail the next few weeks, but if you can add some talent to your team and you're sitting, 10th out of 15, certainly, especially in leagues with playoffs, there's much more of a chance, and plenty of teams should still be in it, and we'll have some names to help you remain in it the rest of the way, but we'll also have our look at the latest headlines, starting with a potentially worrisome one. Juan Soto scratched from the lineup today, shortly before today's show. Turns out just a right hand contusion. Could be a lot worse, although I suppose there is a small chance it turns out to be a lot worse because he is set to go imaging. And if it turns out that there's more than a bruise here, potential hand fracture, that would mean some missed time, certainly.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just kind of something to keep an eye on now. It doesn't seem like it's going to really be anything. He hurt himself on a slide into home, bruised his hand, and he stayed in the game and was initially in today's lineup. So that seems to portend to a day-to-day type situation. But like you said, there's going to be some imaging involved, which always sets off some level of alarms, especially when you're talking about a superstar like Juan Soto. But yeah, it looks like probably a day-to-day injury. Did notice that our buddy Ben Rice was moved up to the number 2 spot in the Yankees lineup as when Soto got scratched. Don't know if that's something that might stick if Soto would have to miss time, but Ben Rice not off to a great start. But again, we mentioned him in last week's show, got catcher eligibility, so that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. Could benefit him, certainly. We had a question here about whether or not Soto had an at-bat after he hurt his hand. I believe he did. Yeah, I think it was in the 4th inning that he slid into home and apparently bruised his hand. He remained in for the rest of the game. So if that is a sign that he felt fine at the time, it's probably encouraging. I don't think that there's an encouraging spin on this next bit of news, which is that Jordan Romano shut down again. He's experiencing more elbow discomforts. It's really been all year for Jordan Romano, on and off injury concerns. And when he's been healthy, he hasn't looked 100% at all. Yeah. I mean, we're not doctors, but we can guess at which way this seems to be trending.
Yeah, if you can, I guess, stash him in an IL spot still, feel free to do so. But I'm certainly not having any qualms about cutting Jordan Romano loose at this point. I have very little faith that he's going to be healthy and effective rest of season now. We'll see if he winds up needing surgery. Of course, the bigger thing to talk about, I guess, is the closer situation. Jimmy Garcia is also currently sidelined. He also has an elbow issue, but it's a nerve-related elbow issue, which generally isn't as worrisome when there's no structural damage. And he has resumed throwing. It seems like he's still probably, 2 weeks away, maybe post All-Star break. We'll see. Chad Green, I don't believe he's actually picked up a save yet still, since he was officially named the closer. But, as we talked about last week, it's still all very much up in the air given the injuries and the looming trade deadline as far as who's Chad Green, I think, is a good bet to probably lead them in saves from now until the trade deadline. But what is their team going to look like at that point? The Blue Jays are, I would say, trending towards sellers, but we don't know for sure. And is Jimmy Garcia going to be traded? Chad Green could be traded too. Might be Nate Pearson, although I guess Nate Pearson could technically be traded as well. We just don't know. So definitely lots of balls in the air with the Toronto bullpen.
Yeah, you mentioned Nate Pearson. He is a name I'm interested in, but he's also given up 5 earned runs across his last 2 appearances, sending his ERA from 3-something up to 5-something. So certainly looks a lot less enticing now. Pearson actually has the team's only save since Romano went down, but that was because Chad Green pitched earlier in that game. Pearson finished the 9th inning there, and since then the Blue Jays have no saves. Barely any wins, either just 2 wins. So we haven't really had the opportunity to see what the plans are, but they did say that it was supposed to be Chad Green. So like you said, Chad Green, if you need some saves for a month, probably a pretty good bet. And I would not be betting on Jordan Romano coming back as a closer this season. I think if he does, count that as a bonus at this point. I would be expecting the worst and we see Dr. Keith Meister's name in his latest news update. That is a name we've come to fear, like James Andrews or Neil Elatrash. Yep. No word on a surgery yet, but certainly would plan on that. And like I said, if you get a couple bonus saves at the very end of September, great. Congratulations. More injury news. We've got Zach Gallen just returned today from a hamstring strain, making a start today against Oakland. So should be set to pitch like Zach Gallen going forward. Do you think there's some worries about him this year, although he has a 3.12 ERA and 1.14 whip in 11 starts before the injury? So that looks like Zach Gallen to me.
Yeah, not really much actionable info here. Just good to know that Zach Gallen is back now. That hamstring injury had been nagging at him off and on for large chunk of the season. I'm glad that they took a little more time this time, so hopefully we can put that in the rear view mirror. And I guess if there's a silver lining, you mentioned concerns about Zach Gallen. For me, it was because the workload last year was so huge and he pitched so deep into the season that could see regression coming there. But with the missed time, it's kind of less of a concern now, I guess. So I guess all systems go for Zach Gallen. Fingers crossed.
All right, and then one final bit of news to tackle in the headline section here. Connor Norby, he's on the taxi squad with Baltimore. Are we worried about an injury for an Oriole? Should we be picking up Norby at anticipation?
Yeah, kind of TBD. The Orioles beat writers don't really seem to know what's going on yet either, but they did both note that Jordan Westberg and Austin Hayes were both out of the lineup yesterday, and they were seen working with trainers today pregame. I don't believe the Orioles have released a lineup at last check. And again, Norby has not been added to the roster yet. I think he's just around as precaution now on the taxi squad. Given how relatively little Hayes has played, obviously the bigger concern here is Jordan Westberg, if he might need a potential IL stint. We don't even know what injury he might be dealing with. No details are available now, but just keep an eye on that. And Norby didn't play regularly when he was up briefly before. I think he's worth a deep league speculation if he does join the roster, but I don't see him as being guaranteed playing time.
All right, we will move on to our big buys of the weekend, although I want to throw in this one comment on the topic of the Blue Jays closer situation. Eddie here suggests Yariel Rodriguez becomes the closer after the deadline. Certainly possible. Yariel Rodriguez was a reliever over in Japan and was excellent. Should note that he hasn't actually looked very good in his 6 major league starts so far. A 5.60 ERA, a 1.87 WHIP, and strikeout and walk numbers both bad. So his actual numbers in his limited MLB action for Yariel Rodriguez certainly don't suggest he's about to be a closer. But pitchers could be much better in relief than as a starter. So it's a name worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, I still like Yariel Rodriguez. It seems like the Blue Jays want to stretch him out to start still, and that's their plan, at least rest of season as it currently sits. But again, kind of an odd situation with him, given that he didn't pitch at all last year and pitched in relief before that. So it's just a weird way for them to potentially handle that workload. And again, there could be a lot of guys dropping like flies, whether it's due to injury or being traded before him. So lots of people do think that he will ultimately wind up in relief. That's still certainly possible. So yeah, that's a name that will be on the radar if the dominoes fall in his direction.
All right, let's move on to the big buys of the weekend, and I'm going to adjust the order on our rundown on the fly because I think we have to kick off this section with James Wood, the 6'7" outfield prospect for the Nationals. Could have been called up maybe earlier this year. It looked like he was maybe quite close to a call up about a month ago before suffering a minor injury. It was a hamstring strain, but didn't miss too much time there. James Wood, the profile on him is like a lot of these other 6'7" type hitters, Ellie De La Cruz and O'Neill Cruz, I guess, if we're talking about the archetype. Those long limbs give you huge power, great overall athleticism, but also come with major swing and miss issues. At least they did for Wood prior to this season. If you look at his strikeout rates in the minor leagues, you see mostly high 20s or even as high as 34% at AA last year. He cut his strikeout rate all the way down to 18% in 52 AAA games this season. Also walking a ton, so just showing great awareness of the zone. Hit .353, 10 homers, 10 steals in 52 games. But we knew that he had some power and some speed. This is not Ellie De La Cruz speed, but maybe O'Neill Cruz level speed. We knew he had all those other things, and man, if he's going to make contact at an above-average clip too, that's a superstar. I'm not counting on all of that happening right away for sure. And it's certainly possible that his, 2 months of increased contact turn out to be the only 2 months of his career where he's making this much contact. But hey, even if he strikes out 33% of the time, everything else James Wood does is probably going to be enough to make him a really good player. Again, huge power here, good speed, maybe a corner outfielder for the bulk of his career, but I think in the early part of his career, he should be able to handle center field. So this is a phenomenal talent, top 5 prospect, according to James Anderson's prospect rankings here at RotoWire. So if there's anywhere where you're allowed to stash him ahead of his debut, which is coming Monday, but he hasn't been stashed yet, throw a lot, I would say, at James Wood, even in this world where we know that a lot of rookies aren't having the best time this year. This is still one you got to go for.
Yep. Yeah, as you mentioned, it's been overall a pretty rough year for the younger rookies that have come up. And, keep in mind that improved plate discipline also has come as a 21-year-old at AAA. Should note that the ABS system at AAA, that kind of has elevated walk numbers everywhere. So how much is that actually improvement from James Wood and how much is it the ABS system? That's something to keep in mind. But, when you're walking almost as much as you're striking out and doing both at a clip of under 20%, over 15% in that range. That's super encouraging. He's, as you mentioned, super young guy. We don't know if he's going to click right away, but he's got all the tools to be a fantasy difference maker for sure. Sounds like the Nationals are probably going to play him in left field and Eddie Rosario be the odd man out. It's so odd that this news came on a Friday and Eddie Rosario is still on the roster, and he's got to be aware of what's going on. Like, he started yesterday's game. I don't think he started today. But I guess the Nationals aren't terribly worried about Eddie Rosario's feelings right now. And we fantasy managers get to see James Wood, so we're not, I guess, terribly worried either.
Yeah, we didn't throw out a number for the bid, but high, whatever. Yeah, higher. Whatever I set it at, you're going to go one higher to make sure you get him. Yep.
This is, if you've hoarded your FAAB dollars, this is one where you want to spend them. A little bit of a lesser name, way lesser of a name.
A little bit, yeah.
My first guy is Michael Massey. I mentioned Michael Massey a few weeks ago, prior to him going on the IL, and he had gotten really hot at the plate. And I did mention him with the caveat that he had left, I think, that night's game the night before with a back issue, and then he wound up getting placed on the IL. He is back now. He's only playing DH so far because he's still kind of working his way back from the back issue. It's a little worrisome that he's feeling well enough to hit, but not well enough to play the field, I guess. But I do think he can hit. He's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start in the few games since returning, but in May, prior to that back issue, 970 OPS, 5 home runs, 18 RBIs in 19 games. The StatCast numbers don't really jump off the page with Massey, but he's cut his strikeout rate this year to 17.2%. He's been batting 5th regularly in the Royals lineup. That lineup's struggling a little bit right now, but still a pretty decent spot to be in. Worried about the back injury still, but if healthy, I think Michael Massey can be at the very least, a middle infielder starting quality fantasy option.
Yeah, agreed. And as that Royals lineup gets more interesting, he'll get more interesting a little bit along with it. So I wouldn't throw too much at Michael Massey, but a couple bucks for sure. My next name here, Heston Kjerstad. We've done this once before. Should I say the line? They're not going to call him up just to sit him on the bench. They did last time. I don't know if we explicitly said those words, but we might have. And I think fantasy podcasters and writers were correctly mocked for using that phrase, because guess what? That's exactly what they did. And it does indeed happen. Not just with Kjerstad, not just with the Orioles. Prospects don't always come up and play all the time. And I think it's different on a losing team. Say James Wood, they're not going to call him up just to put him on the bench. I'm comfortable saying that. The Nationals, I mean, maybe they're a contender, but if they are, it's because James Wood is going to have an amazing second half and keep them in the race or something. His promotion is about him. He's ready. Let's see what he can do. Heston Kjerstad's promotion is about the Orioles. He's up because he can help a contender win, and that means if he's not going to help a contender win, he's going to go back down or go to the bench. But he really might be good enough to help them more than some of their other players. I mean, it's actually a fairly equal talent distribution, perhaps in a lot of areas in this Orioles roster, which allows them to say, hey, Colton Cowser, you're not doing great this week. You're going to spend some time on the bench. Cedric Mullins, looks like it's you on the bench this week. So looking at how often Kjerstad has actually played since this call-up, we don't yet have today's lineups in, but it looks like he sat against one lefty and has started against 3 out of every 4 righties, or 3 out of the 4 righties so far. Man, if it was 4 out of 4, I would have been all over that and said, wow, okay, Heston Kjerstad, he is on the strong side of the platoon. Get ready. He's going to unleash his power bat in a good lineup here. The fact that he did sit against Max Scherzer means he's not a literal every righty starter. But, you know, if he's playing 4 times a week, that's going to be enough, I think, with his power and with the strength of this lineup around him. So I think that I'm back in on Heston Kjerstad. I think he's playing just enough, although if by the time you're listening to this, he's sat 2 more times, then ignore him, I guess.
Yeah, this is why we wanted the Orioles to trade some of their prospects for a starting pitcher, which I guess they did both with Corbin Burns over the offseason, but we really wanted them to trade some more for another starter. I think there's a pretty good chance that's going to happen before the end of the trade deadline. But until then, we just don't know for sure that we're going to see Heston Kjerstad in the lineup regularly, even against righties. Pretty encouraging usage so far, especially relative to his usage his last stint in the majors, as you mentioned. So obviously the power is massive. Definitely worth taking a shot on, even with the playing time uncertainty. I'm going to go with Miguel Andujar next. Do we call this a post hype sleeper? Maybe 29 years old.
Yeah,
29 years old now. Andujar had a great spring with the A's. He was seemingly set for an everyday role, but then he had a knee injury that required surgery late in spring training, but has come back and looked good. 317, 346, 417. Couple home runs, 6 doubles in 30 games for the A's. He's batted second to fourth in the lineup for every one of his starts, consistently hitting in the middle of that not great A's lineup, but still hitting in the middle of a lineup. Obviously, we're well past the point of having a major level of excitement for Miguel Andujar. He was, I believe, the Rookie of the Year runner-up the year that Shohei Ohtani was Rookie of the Year, to give you an idea that when the buzz was at its buzziest for Miguel Andujar. Has had some injuries since then. That's partly to blame. He also hasn't been great during his time in the majors since then. But he did hit some with the Pirates last year. He's hit well so far with the A's this year. I think he's a deep league option, not one I'm super excited about. But he's shown enough to where I think he should be back on the mixed league radar, and I don't think it's going to cost a whole bunch. A guy that you could throw $1 or $2 at, and could be a capable fifth outfielder.
Yeah, and this is the whole point of the A's for our purposes. Just wait until somebody proves that they actually deserve some playing time, and then go get that guy and enjoy a few months of a pretty decent hitter that you didn't think about at all during draft season. Speaking of pretty decent hitter, that describes Jose Miranda, who probably has been mentioned on this show in the past. And, it's kind of similar logic now, but I'm surprised by how many shallower leagues you can still get Jose Miranda in. I believe he's 100% owned in deeper leagues like TGFBI. I don't think he should be down in the 20s and 30s on places like Yahoo, CBS, or ESPN, because Miranda can hit. He can hit this year. He had such a bad year last year that he didn't even make the opening day roster this season, but he got a chance very quickly when Royce Lewis got hurt the first time, and he's taken his chance and now is continuing to play regularly, even with Lewis healthy again. Maybe not quite a literal everyday player for Miranda, but not too far from it. He's always made a good amount of contact, but he's making even more this year. And actually, if you look at his strikeout rate over his 3 seasons, 19%, 16%, 14%. It's a nice line there, showing some real growth. And he's also barreling the ball up more this season, an 8% barrel rate compared to 6% for his career. Not a big change, but if you make a ton of contact and barrel the ball up at a league average rate, that's actually a quite good hitter, not just a fringy one. Now, that could just be Miranda's had a hot first half, and he's going to fall back to being more of a fringy hitter in the second half. And then you have the worries that the Twins' rather flat talent distribution will send him to the bench or even back to the minors while they rotate in their other hitters who are above average but not stars. So that's the downside there with Miranda. But at this point, he's been doing it for most of 3 months. He looked close to this, but actually not quite as good as a rookie 2 years ago. And at this point, maybe we say that this is who Jose Miranda is, and last year was the blip.
Yeah, and he had the shoulder Did he wind up? I think he wound up having surgery for that too. And you always worry about how they're going to bounce back from that, especially from a power perspective. But as you mentioned, he's looked great. I remember over the offseason, Carlos Correa, I think, was training with him, and he commented about how awesome Jose Miranda was looking. So I guess maybe we should have been paying attention to Carlos Correa over the winter.
Best shape of his life, but from a teammate, is that worth more than from himself? I don't know.
Yeah, take it with a grain of salt, but he turned out to be right in this case. Another guy coming back from injury who I think could be worth stashing, Tommy Edman, looks like he's going to be ready for a rehab assignment soon. He's been out all season with the very slow recovery from what was supposed to be a minor wrist procedure. And he sprained an ankle this week while rehabbing, but looks like that's going to be basically a non-issue, maybe set him back a day or two, but he is on track to begin a rehab assignment next week. It looks like Michael Ciani has been awesome defensively in center field. He really can't hit, although he's actually hit a little bit lately. You could make the argument that Tommy Edman himself is not a great hitter, but for fantasy purposes, he's been pretty darn good. He hits for a respectable average, can get you double-digit home runs, and obviously contributes a lot in the stolen base department, all while being multi-position eligible. So I still am confident that the plan is to make Edman the everyday center fielder. Maybe they'll work him in a little at second base since Nolan Gorman is in the midst of one of his cold streaks again. But either way, I think Edman is going to be playing pretty much every day, and he's widely available, I think. Yahoo looks like the roster sit percentage is currently at 25%. So I think he's worth stashing and looks like he has a shot to be back before the All-Star break. And this is one of those bids that, it could probably get away with just $1 or $2 and hope nobody's paying attention. Maybe the fact that the rehab assignment words have been thrown around, maybe they'll pique people's interest more, but shouldn't cost you a whole lot to stash Tommy Edman. And he's definitely proven to be a useful fantasy option in the past.
Yeah, I'm feeling good about my call to entirely skip him during draft season. I remember things were kind of ambiguous, and it looked like maybe he'd only miss a little bit of time. And hey, could this be a real bargain as he starts to slip down the draft boards? No, is the answer to that question. But quite a good fantasy player, and if he is available for most of the second half, you want him on your team, even if you didn't want him there in the first half. Let's move to the mound. I'm going to go to David Festa, who just made his major league debut for the Twins. A pretty highly rated prospect, David Festa. One way I like to look at those things, well, we could just look at his overall prospect ranking. According to James Anderson here at RotoWire, that's at 51. So a middle top 100 type prospect. In terms of thinking about how big the bids might be for him, I like looking at the prospects who have an ETA of 2024, and it looks like among those starting pitchers, he's 7th, according to James's prospect rankings, a couple spots behind Hurston Waldrop, a few spots ahead of guys like Adam Mazer, Cade Povich, Robert Gasser, who debuted already. So an interesting prospect. Of course, those guys haven't exactly caught the world by storm, so that's a reminder that, not necessarily expecting immediate dominance for Festa, and he didn't immediately dominate. Certainly in his MLB debut, wasn't anything special. He did pick up the win against the Diamondbacks, but gave up 5 runs on 7 hits and a walk in 5 innings. Really, though, what we're looking at is prospect pedigree, which Festa has, and the potential to stick around a while. If he's going to do that, he will either have to outpitch Simeon Woods Richardson, doable maybe, but not necessarily that easy. He could also outpitch Chris Paddock, who is currently hurt with forearm fatigue. That is the reason why Festa got his opportunity. And Paddock has not been anything special before he got hurt. A 5.29 ERA, 1.43 WHIP. So in my head, it shouldn't be too hard for Festa to outpitch that guy the rest of the way. And so we're looking at a situation where a talented young pitcher doesn't have much success in his first start, and that'll keep the bids down. So if you can sneak him in at a small to medium bid, maybe don't use him until we see one good major league start, but there's a chance that you can sneak in a fairly cheap bid on someone who turns out to be pretty helpful in the second half.
Yeah, I had Festa in our budget buys last week as a stash. I was not expecting him to be up the next week, but that might turn out to be a sneaky little pickup. And I don't think it's going to cost a whole lot. He's not a premium prospect, but good bat misser in the minors. And I think he's, especially since that first start didn't go super well, I think you can get him pretty cheap, and especially from a strikeouts perspective, could pay some dividends. Jameson Taillon still well under 50% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Felt like he was worth throwing on here. He's turned in 4 straight quality starts, 10 strikeouts, 0 walks, 1 run over 7 innings against the Mets last weekend. That was with the wind blowing out at Wrigley, and you'll recall the day before that is when Shota Imanaga saw his ERA blow up. So pretty encouraging start there. He followed it up with a less great start, but still a quality start against the Brewers. He really just had 1 bad inning. He gave up a grand slam to Jackson Churio, but one of those runs was unearned, so still get a quality start. Strikeouts have been lacking overall on the season, but in June, 29-5 strikeout to walk rate over 30 innings, so trending in the right direction there. We've gotten a lot more consistency from Jameson Taillon this season. Just 1 start with more than 3 earned runs allowed. I feel like the major issue with him, particularly last year, is we would see 3 or 4 really good starts in a row, and then he would give up 8 runs, and then he'd have a couple good starts, and then he'd give up 6 runs, and you could just never trust him in your lineup. But he's been way more consistent this year. So I think he should be basically universally rostered, even though the upside isn't super high. What is the bid going to look like? I mean, if you're in need of a pitcher, I think you can put in a moderate bid, I would say. What do you think, 5 or 6?
Yeah, just in those shallower leagues, I think Taillon is someone who doesn't pop, and so you don't necessarily need to go too high on him, but you certainly would be happily using him in most of his starts, I would say. I've got a reliever here, Aroldis Chapman. I mean, if you need saves, I think he's the top one if he's out there still. David Bednar went down just a little bit less than a week ago, so maybe Chapman has been scooped up, but I wanted to throw him on just to ask Aroldis Chapman versus Chad Green, now that we know that Jordan Romano has had his setback, and it's looking pretty likely that someone else will be getting the saves in Toronto the rest of the way. Whereas Chapman, he's behind David Bednar, who's got a strained left oblique that presumably doesn't keep you out for an entire half season. But Chapman's very much the guy now. Who would you rather have?
I would lean Green out of the 2, I think. Just as you mentioned, David Bednar probably not going to be traded, especially with the Pirates theoretically in the playoff hunt. Aroldis Chapman definitely worth rostering, but Green probably has a better chance of keeping that closer job a little bit longer, I think.
All right. And then we've got one more starter. Who you got?
Yeah, I think it's time to pick Drew Thorpe back up if he had been cut loose. He's got back-to-back great starts, 6 innings, 0 earned runs, just 2 hits allowed against the Tigers. And last time out, 6 innings, 2 runs, 2 hits against the Rockies. Had 1 really bad start at Arizona. I think that got people off of him, understandably. But 2 or fewer runs in 3 of his 4 starts so far with the White Sox. He's only allowed 7 hits in 17 innings in those 3 starts. Changeup has been as advertised. He had arguably the best changeup of any pitching prospect in baseball. I feel like our guy James Anderson has commented as such, it was his favorite changeup. But that's produced a 111 batting average against so far. 136 expected batting average and a 41.3% whiff rate. Not a great fastball for Drew Thorpe. Sits in the low 90s. He's not going to overpower anyone in that regard, but he's got a premium pitch. He's always limited hard contact and limited hits throughout the minors and so far at the majors as well. So I think he usually throws strikes as well. Hasn't so far at the major league level, but that's a small enough sample that I'm not super concerned. I think he could be a whip asset. Obviously, there's things working against him, most notably his poor team. Also not a great ballpark to pitch in, but I think he's worth picking back up and starting in, your fairly typical sized leagues. Not a super high upside guy, but I do like Drew Thorpe.
Yeah, I don't love the lack of whiffs combined with the reports of a bad fastball. Not just the reports, the data of a bad fastball. Looks like I'm pretty worried that we're never going to get a lot of strikeouts there, but you don't need a lot of strikeouts to be a good pitcher, and Drew Thorpe certainly has shown flashes of being a good pitcher. Anyway, we are going to move on to our budget buys right after this message and a little game from Pick6. Do you ever, or did you ever, play the over-under game with your friends? Think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds, or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter. If you have, then you're going to love Pick6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat, like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick6 app and use code RWPicks. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick6 credits. That's code RWPicks for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in Pick6 credits only on DraftKings Pick6. The crown is yours. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. Working on my the speed of my reads there. Got those disclaimers down. But in addition to this quick message from Pick6, we're going to play a little game with Pick6. We're going to make 6 picks in Pick6 for tonight's games. Last week, Ryan, how did we do?
6-0.
Nice. So that
hopefully
means
you guys listen to us.
Exactly. If we go at least 4-2 this week, then we'll start keeping track of our scores. And if we don't, we'll never mention it again. But anyway, who is your first pick today as we try to go 6-0 for the second straight week?
I'm going to go Riley Green over 6.5 fantasy points. Facing Griffin Canning of the Angels tonight. Canning against righties, a 668 OPS, against lefties, 875 OPS. He's given up 10 home runs and 196 plate appearances versus left-handed pitching. And Riley Green terrorizes righties. 916 OPS, 12 of his 15 home runs have been against right-handed pitching this season. So a guy who's been very hittable, a guy who's had a mini breakout this season in Riley Green. 6.5 is not a whole lot to ask. He's averaged well over that this season. So I think Riley Green's a pretty good bet to hit the over there.
All right. For my first one, I'm looking at Pablo Lopez's strikeouts. And this is a really interesting one. It's set at 7.5. Our tool, our RotoWire Pick6 tool, says the under here. And I might advertise this tool while ignoring it. Is that an acceptable thing to do? I think it's a great tool, and I think I'm going to go against it in this one instance. I mean, I'm not going to just blindly follow it in all cases. That wouldn't be very fun. I think Pablo Lopez, the line here is set high at 7.5 strikeouts, but the reason it's set so high is because of the Mariners. They strike out a ton, a 27.7% strikeout rate on the season. The only team within 2 points of that mark is the A's. They're just well worse than league average in terms of strikeout rate. And Pablo Lopez, is a good strikeout pitcher. He's had an up and down season this year, but he just struck out 14 A's in his most recent start. And on the whole, a 27.5% strikeout rate is right in line with the good version of Pablo Lopez. So I think that even though it's set high, and I think that maybe what the RotoWire Pick6 tool is telling me is that no, if it's hit just a little bit too high, this should be 6.5, and then you take the over. I am going to take more than 7.5 strikeouts for Pablo Lopez anyway.
Yeah, I mean, all he has to do is just get barely more than half the number of strikeouts he got in his last start. That doesn't seem like too much to ask.
Exactly.
I'm going to go Jorge Soler under 5.5 fantasy points for my next pick. Tyler Glasnow versus Jorge Soler just seems like a really terrible matchup for Jorge Soler. Glasnow this season against righties, 475 OPS, 36.6% strikeout rate. Jorge Soler against righties this season, 661 OPS. Soler is a guy who's, he's going to have these games where he's going to go way over 5.5 fantasy points, and he's got to have more games than not where he's going to go under. And in a matchup against Tyler Glasnow, I think he's a pretty good bet to go under.
All right. And I am looking at picks involving Royce Lewis. And hey, I'm going to search. We could search for the best ones here with Royce Lewis. And it looks like our tool is saying either the more on his fantasy score or the more on his hits plus one, runs plus RBI. I'll take that second one. That's a little bit cleaner. 1.5 hits plus runs plus RBI. I like to think of this as the good game prop. Basically, if you have at least 2 hits, runs, or RBI, you had a good game. Solo homer gets you there, an RBI double gets you there. That's a good game. You can't really go under that mark and have a good game in most cases. And I think Royce Lewis, he's the ideal for any sort of pick'em DFS type thing where on a per game basis, there's very few players better than Royce Lewis. It's tough to roster him in season-long fantasy because you're not getting that many games, or at least you're pretty worried you're not getting that many games. So, hey, make up for it by including him in all of your DraftKings lineups and in Pick6. So I'm going more than 1.5 hits plus runs plus RBI for him against Bryce Miller, who is not scary enough to keep me off Royce Lewis.
I'm going to double up on picking on right-handed Giants hitters here and go with Elliot Ramos, the under, also 5.5 fantasy points. Kind of a breakout season for Elliot Ramos so far, but he's done so much of his damage against lefties. Against righties, has just a 665 OPS, a 31.3% strikeout rate. He's also started to regress a little bit. Over the last 10 games, has gone just 5 for 41 at the plate. And again, a guy like Elliot Ramos, I just think is a really terrible matchup for Tyler Glasnow. He's going to have these games where he goes way over the 5.5, but against Tyler Glasnow, I'm betting on the under.
All right, and finally, to wrap things up here, I'll go Luis Rengifo to go more than 5.5 fantasy points here. Reese Olson is the opposing pitcher for the Tigers, who's fine, but not scary enough to keep me completely off of opposing hitters. And I'm seeing a very large blue bar here on our Pick6 page where it tells you just how much we're leaning in that direction. And the projected points, according to RotoWire, for Luis Rengifo, 7.6, which is a lot more than 5.5. You rarely see the projected points off from the line by this much, and I'm right behind the projections here. Rengifo has been interesting all year. He's been particularly hot lately. 3 straight 2-hit games, 2 straight games with a homer. Also, he's been running much more this season, which is one reason I'm going to go with a fantasy score too, as well as just the hits plus runs plus RBI, because maybe he'll get there with the steal. But that'll be it for our Pick6 segment. Hope we go 6-0 again. And let's bring it back to the main topic of the day, which is our FAAB pickups of the weekend. Ryan, let's move to the budget pitchers. And just a little bit behind the scenes, we were not all that enthused about this week's collection of budget pitchers.
Yeah, I got Trevor Rogers as my first guy, and you we're probably hoping that Trevor Rogers would be in the other section, maybe. Not currently, but given his pedigree, you would think he would be a guy higher standing. You wouldn't have to rely on a budget buy, but last man standing in the Marlins rotation, basically. I mean, if you're in a innings pitched league, maybe pick him up because I think he's going to have to make like 40 starts in the second half for the Marlins because they have no one left. But Trevor Rogers, 3 straight quality starts, 3.28 ERA over his last 6 starts. Failed to build on that breakout 2021 season, and his velocity's a bit down this year, but improving of late. Obviously, he's in a favorable home park. And again, we're not super crazy about the budget pitchers this week. So Trevor Rogers is what we have, and he's shown some upside in the past.
Yeah, I think I have re-added him in several deep leagues this season after maybe I myself was the one to drop him. Not really sure, but he's been on that line of, I think just decent, just barely good enough. And hey, we've got a comment here that is very timely. Check out the box score of the Reds-Cardinals game. Carson Spires should be at the top of your list tonight. Well, he's not at the top of the list, but he was next on the outline here. I put him on the outline before this game, rather nervous about which section he should end up on, because if he got lit up, then it wasn't going to look great. But his line is not yet final, I don't believe. Oh, it looks like the Cardinals have just scored a second run. But as of right now, 5 2/3, 3 hits, 1 earned run, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts for Carson Spires, who came into the start with a 3.45 ERA, a 1.24 WHIP in 31 1/3 innings as a swingman. This is a 26-year-old who got brief cup of coffee last year, didn't do too much with it. In the minors this season, in 8 starts and 1 relief appearance, he did look pretty good. 2.51 ERA, 1.05 WHIP, strikeout rate 25%. The strikeouts haven't really been there, though, at the major league level. And when you combine that with the fact that the home park really is not there for Carson Spires in Cincinnati, my excitement level is not going to get too high, but the way he's pitching in his limited action so far and pretty good AAA numbers means I think he definitely deserves a mention and should probably be on deeper mixed league rosters, even if I'm not yet saying he's got it figured out and is going to be a dude in the second half.
Yeah, I think Davis Daniel is worth a mention as my next pick here. He went 8 shutout innings in his first major league start. Just 4 hits, 0 walks, 8 strikeouts against the Tigers. 5.33 ERA at AAA, but keep in mind that's an incredibly difficult environment to pitch in. He did have an 82-25 strikeout to walk rate over 76 innings at AAA Salt Lake. 26.4% strikeout rate in the minors to go with a 7.5% walk rate. Missed most of 2023 with a shoulder injury, but he's been really good when healthy, both in the minors and in the majors. Strikeout to walk rate last year in relief was not great, but managed to keep that ERA down. He's pitched really well at AAA this year. I mean, we're talking about a 27-year-old kind of fringe prospect. Maybe you can't even call him really even a prospect at that age. And he's a guy who the Angels, I guess, have passed over for starts before, but he's pitched well lately and obviously looked fantastic in his first start. So I am at least willing to roster Davis Daniel in a deeper league and see where it goes.
Yeah, worth a shot there. My next budget pitcher, I want to throw out Michael Mercado, stepping into the 5th starter spot for the Phillies, at least temporarily. Not someone necessarily all that exciting on his own merits, but with Taijuan Walker out probably through the All-Star break with a finger issue, and now Spencer Turnbull out maybe up to 2 months with a lat injury, there's going to be some starts available in Philly. Mercado looks like he should make a couple of them. Again, not a exciting prospect or anything like that, but a decent enough numbers, depending on where you look in his AAA performance this year. 171 ERA, but a 12% walk rate is a bit of a worry. So some of the ERA estimators weren't convinced, and he only had a 23% strikeout rate. So not some shutdown arm there. In relief in the Rays system last year, he was striking out a lot of batters. So not suggesting any real major bids on Michael Mercado, but the Phillies are a good team, good chance of getting some wins in the short term. Looks like he could get a 2-start week next week, but at Chicago and then at Atlanta. I suppose it's not as scary of an at Atlanta as normal. Wouldn't necessarily get all that excited about that second start, though, for a guy who I'm not excited about in isolation in Michael Mercado, but I think the Phillies are good enough that anyone who's getting some starts with them is worth a shot. And hey, they've also been pretty good at improving pitchers lately. So even though Mercado isn't that exciting, it's weird to say as a Phillies fan, but they're now one of the organizations where I say, he went to the Phillies. Maybe there's something there. So very much a under the radar, a minor move here, but keep the name in mind.
Yeah, Caleb Cotham is kind of, I think, on that short list of pitching coaches you want your pitchers to go pitch for now. And you see Christopher Sanchez throwing a shutout last night. He's looked great. He got that extension. Not necessarily counting on the same thing for Michael Mercado, but as you mentioned, any pitcher for the Phillies could pick up some wins. Another guy going into the rotation with the Cubs, Hayden Wesneski. Looks like he'll stick in the rotation for a little while with Javier Assad going down with a forearm injury. In 4 starts in 2024, Wesneski has a 3.10 ERA, 21-5 strikeout to walk rate in 20 1/3 innings. He's been way better against left-handed batters this year after just getting absolutely destroyed by them last year. There's not really been a change in his pitch mix, so I can't say with any level of confidence that he's solved those problems. But if he has, that's potentially huge for him. And he's tentatively lined up for 2 starts next week. One of them is against the Phillies, but they'll be without Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber, so a little less daunting. We've been interested in Hayden Wesneski at times the past couple of years, and he's pitched well when given shots in the rotation with the Cubs this year. And he's going to be getting some more shots now. So deeper leagues, I think he's worth a shot.
Yeah, one way I like to get just a very quick overview of how good a pitcher is under the hood, I just look at the strikeout rate, walk rate, ground ball rate. And the remarkable thing about Wesneski is for his career, all those marks are almost exactly league average. 23% strikeout, I guess he's 22.9, 7.9% walk rate, 42.5% ground ball rate. Hayden Wesneski is what a league average pitcher looks like. And you don't normally get a league average pitcher entering the rotation as your 8th starter. So rotation depth, I guess, has not been the problem with that Cubs pitching staff. It's very much been the bullpen. We will move on to our budget hitters, although I want to throw in one more name from the chat, if I can find it. I guess there's a couple names in here, but Landon Knack is the main one I wanted to mention here. I keep getting a couple more chances with the Dodgers. I think everything I said about Michael Mercado in that, hey, if you're the 5th starter on a good team, some chances for wins. Well, you throw it with Landon Knack, also maybe a little bit more interesting of a prospect and a better pitcher's park. Don't know if he's going to be starting for a long time, but something there in deeper leagues, probably worth a shot in the short term. We will move to our budget hitters, but first, this message from Home Run Forecast. Can certain weather conditions lead to more home runs? The atmosphere can affect how far a ball flies by 20%. Home Run Forecast measures the weather conditions at a ballpark to tell us if the atmosphere is good or bad for ball flight during a game. An index value that rates the air is created for each game and ballpark and is displayed on a scale from 1 to 10. Home Run Forecast's premium site offers index values by the hour for each game, 24-hour forecasts, wind direction and speed, and even whether the roof will be open at certain stadiums. Home Run Forecast is offering a special for the start of the baseball season. You can get access to the premium site for the entire season for only $28, a savings of nearly 30%. Go to homerunforecast.com/RotoWire now to sign up. And we're back here on the home stretch of the Saturday FAAB edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Moving on to the budget hitters. And hey, fitting with that home run forecast read, we've got Jhonkensy Noel, who hit a home run in his first career MLB at bat, getting called up earlier this week. Very much a power over hit prospect for the Guardians. More or less positionless as well, I would say, but has very legitimate pop, had 18 homers in 65 AAA games prior to this season. And if there's a little bit of playing time ahead of him, I'm pretty interested. Now, I just don't know how much playing time is going to be there, which is why he's just a budget bat or budget buy. And, the scouts did not necessarily love this guy's hit tool. Some pretty significant strikeout concerns, although at the AAA level this year, only a 21% strikeout rate. So he's perhaps taken some steps forward in that area. I want to see where this goes. Anytime you've got a prospect who some places are putting an 80 on his raw power, not necessarily his game power, but if he's got that kind of strength, literally top of the scale strength, and at least some opportunity to work his way into the mix at first base or DH, or maybe corner outfield in Cleveland. He's a luxury ad, but he's one I'd want to prioritize if I could afford a luxury.
Yeah, and I wrote the blurb of when Noel got called up, and I remember he got off to a really terrible start in April, and his strikeout rate since May 1st is like 18%, so even better over the last 2 months. So I don't know if that's legitimate strides forward, but for a guy whose main issue really has been his strikeouts, it's super encouraging because he can definitely hit the ball a long way. Sticking with the Guardians, I'm gonna go with Daniel Schneemann, not to be confused with Max Schumann from the A's. I don't know if I'm the only one who's made.
You are not. I have confused them as well.
That's good to hear. Schneemann has started 12 of 14 games since being called up by the Guardians. He started all but one against right-handed pitching. Last 3 games with the Guardians, he's batted fourth and second twice. Could be the regular right fielder for now against righties with Will Brennan going on the IL. He's got an 835 OPS, 2 home runs, 1 stolen base in 20 games with the Guardians. Had a 983 OPS at AAA before being called up. I mean, he's, I think, kind of viewed as like this light-hitting utility guy, but he's got a 50% hard hit rate so far, 10.5% bail rate for the Guardians. So maybe there's a little bit more juice in that bat than we realized, and he's multi-position eligible. I think maybe he's only got eligible at like 2 positions so far, but as much as he's bounced around, he could pick up additional eligibility, and hitting right now in a premium spot in a surprisingly good Guardians lineup. So Daniel Schneemann, not Max Schumann, Daniel Schneemann, I think is a deeply viable guy.
Yeah, I had held off on throwing him on the outline for a week or two, even though we could have. He's been up for
because you're worried you're going to say Max Schumann.
Perhaps, and also perhaps just because it was hard to separate him from Max Schumann and from every other player who doesn't debut until his age 27 season and doesn't have much prospect pedigree. And there was no real reason to have thought about Daniel Schneemann at all prior to his debut. Most of his minor league numbers are mediocre at best. There's a reason why he didn't show up until age 27, but he does look like he can hit. The strikeouts are a bit high, but he's hitting the ball hard. I think this might be a late 20s breakout. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but certainly there's more teams that I'd feel comfortable adding him on now than there were a couple weeks ago. Moving on to, I'm going to cheat and pair a couple Phillies here together. Edmundo Sosa and Johan Rojas. I'm mentioning these two guys because the Phillies had a pair of injuries on Thursday, I believe it was. Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper both going down with relatively mild muscle injuries. Would expect them to be out through the All-Star break. obnoxiously, the Phillies are coming here to Wrigley Field next week, and I'm going to miss both of those guys, which is too bad. But I don't think that they were thinking of me when they chose when to get hurt. But with 2 additional spots in the Phillies lineup for at least a couple weeks, Edmundo Sosa and Johan Rojas can be owned on more teams now. Sosa really has actually performed quite well throughout the season. Looks like he might deserve to be a starter on another team. I don't want to say that yet because it hasn't been enough games yet, but he also isn't an outfielder, so we can't go with ex-Cardinals outfielder quite as much there, but maybe he'll play a few games out there and get the magic. But Edmundo Sosa, I think, has become interesting enough to use whenever he's got a run of playing time, and he's getting one right now. And then Johan Rojas is an interesting one. He was optioned about 10 days ago because he was not good enough. He could not hit. And his glove, which was supposed to be the thing which kept him in the lineup, even if his bat dwindled, his glove took a step back too. So Johan Rojas just looked like he needed a stay in the minors. And I think the Phillies probably wanted to give him at least through the All-Star break to clear his head, sort things out. But with these 2 injuries, he's right back in the lineup and he's playing again. So it's not like he's just coming up to sit on the bench. And the thing with Rojas is he actually was positive fantasy value in a lot of places, even though he wasn't very good because he was running enough that in deeper leagues, Johan Rojas is still going to be worth it. And he's, again, right back in the lineup. So not going to help you in too many places, but if you're in need of speed, go get Johan Rojas. And if you're in need of an infielder who you are going to have to drop in a few weeks when he goes back to the bench, get Edmundo Sosa. And also, I saw Cody Clemens add to the watch list too. He's getting some short-term playing time with Bryce Harper out. I don't know if I want to endorse Cody Clemens, given that he hasn't really ever done much before, but he has done some stuff this season, so maybe there's some spots where you want to go with him over some other unproven corner guy.
I'm going to stick with Guardians again, and someone in the chat mentioned earlier Gabriel Arias. Also seeing more playing time lately. He started 4 straight games before sitting out on Friday. So far in June, he's got a 1039 OPS, a couple home runs and a stolen base. Mentioned that Schneemann could be getting some run in right field. Gabriel Arias also is an option in right field. He's an option basically everywhere. And Brian Rocchio is graded out above average with the glove, but he's been consistently one of the worst hitting regulars in baseball. I don't know that Arias is going to supplant him as the starter there, but that's another avenue for at-bats for him. Arias has terrible plate discipline, and he's not quite hitting the ball as hard as he did last year, but he has shown interesting StatCast data in the past, as recently as 2023. He's heated up at the plate this year. He's a former top 100 prospect, depending on where you look. So I think he's interesting as a guy, especially in Yahoo leagues, who has 1, 2, 3, 4 spots where he's eligible, not including corner infield, middle infield. So he's a useful plug-and-play guy in a deeper league where you're maybe trying to cover up for some injuries.
Yeah, nice end of the roster guy for sure. I will end the show today with Michael Toglia, sort of included on his own merits, but sort of standing in for all Rockies that are available right now because the Rockies are just starting a 4-series stretch where the conditions are just about as good as possible for their hitters. They're in the middle of game 2 of 3 against the White Sox right now, which is one of the best places to have a hitter. And then they've got 7 games at Coors Field, which is the literal best place to start a hitter. And then right after that, they go for a 4-game series at Cincinnati, which I'm pretty sure is the second best hitters park in the league. So this is the time, if you've got those Rockies who bounce on and off your roster when they're home or away, now's the time to go get them. There's really only like one of the next 7 series where you wouldn't want them. The final series before the break, they're at the Mets, but then they come right back from the break with 2 straight home series. So we're looking at a stretch where you're going to want your Rockies in there almost all the time, whatever the fringy Rockies are for your league size. If there's a few guys who just aren't quite good enough under normal conditions, they're good enough right now. So go get them. Michael Toglia is the one that I'm mentioning here in particular because he homered 3 times in his last 4 games. Overall, he's hitting 192 in 35 games while striking out 35% of the time. So I'm not saying that Michael Toglia is a good hitter on his own merits, but the power's real. Those 9 homers in 35 games mean that he is on pace for 42 over 600 plate appearances. So real power, real swing and miss concerns, but most importantly, the best stretch of the schedule that you're going to get. So go get Toglia or any other relevant Rocky, I would say.
Yeah, I added Toglia in a couple deeper leagues a couple weeks ago, and he's done pretty well. The power is definitely legitimate. He hit a bomb last night against the White Sox. As you mentioned, major swing and miss concern. He's not a perfect hitter by any stretch of the imagination, but does have power, and the upcoming schedule is quite nice.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you to our sponsor, Pick6. Thank you to the listeners and chatters. We'll be back next week, and I'll be back tomorrow with my guest, Shelly Verstrate. We'll be talking rookies. Are the struggling ones really this bad? Are the ones off to hot starts really this good? I'll find out tomorrow here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast.